Hello, my friends. It is day 296, and we're reading John chapter 7 through John chapter 8. But before we get into our recap today, I want to thank you for taking a moment to check out this video. Hopefully, you're finding the yearly Bible reading program enjoyable and beneficial. If you have not yet accepted the invitation, it may be too late, but you can always prepare for 2026 by visiting www.selflesschurch.org. On the homepage, you'll see a link that will take you directly to the description box, or rather to a link where you can sign up to learn more about everything we'll be doing in the upcoming year. So we'd love for you to be a part of the group, and we hope you'll join us in next year's reading. So today we're reading in the Gospel of John, and we all know that the purpose of John's Gospel is to present Jesus as Israel's God. And that's important that we make a designation and a distinction between God and Israel's God, because it would have not have been abnormal for individuals in the ancient world to see individuals as men, as gods or divine beings, right? So, like, for instance, Caesar was considered a god, and they worshiped him as such. He was seen as an imperial ruler, which is to say he rules on behalf of the gods, right? So there's a certain element of divinity applied to him. The phrase Son of God was just as applicable to him as it would have been to Jesus for Christians. And so when we say Jesus is God, what we mean is Jesus is Israel's God. And that's very, very, very important to make that distinction. Now, the reason we bring that up is because in chapter 7, there are individuals who are having quite an issue accepting this truth. And surprisingly, it is the family members of Jesus. You see in chapter 7 where he's traveling around Galilee, and his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea where your followers can see your miracles," kind of like mocking him. He says, "You can't become famous if you hide like this. If you can do such wonderful things, show yourself to the world." For even his brothers, it says, didn't believe him. And that's just, man, it's just interesting dynamic here. You see these familial issues, these family problems, if you will, even in the life of Jesus. And so he tells them, now is not the right time. The world can't hate you. In fact, he tells them, you go do it. Like, you can do this anytime. Why aren't you doing something? He has to operate on a time schedule, on a schedule that is respective of his duty and of his calling here. And so he's like, but you guys can go anytime. And so you can see here that there's this dynamic between the family members. Now, you will see later, as after the resurrection, the family members come around and they believe. But here you can see that's just another layer of opposition that Jesus had to deal with. We also saw here where Jesus' messiahship was questioned on several occasions. There were people who believed, but there were also a number of people who did not believe. And this was something that seemingly was consistent within Jesus' ministry, where some people got it, it clicked for them. For others, they didn't believe it, even if they did see the miracles and the signs and the wonders. And so as we read through this, there's always this excitement, I won't say excitement, this drama behind Jesus' ministry, where he seemingly is portrayed as one always in the middle of some sort of contention. Not necessarily contention that he calls for himself, but rather it was contention relative to the fact that he was doing things uniquely different, doing things in a way that people did not understand in many instances, and they would accordingly they would push back on it. My favorite part of the reading today, one of them, was the story of the woman caught in adultery. And this is a passage that is unique to the Gospel of John. In fact, there may be a note in your Bible that John chapter 7 verse 53 through chapter 8 verse 11 is not included in most Greek manuscripts. And so first off, it's not just unique to John's Gospel, but it's unique to many of the Greek manuscripts. And so there's a lot of debate there. I kind of welcome this kind of textual criticism and textual variance as we think through it, because it gives us an opportunity to face the truth as it is historically represented. So there's nothing to be alarmed there. It's just a clear fact and observation. But it's a very great story about how Jesus stood up for this very, I would say, victimized, this woman who was victimized. And the way in which he did it not only introduced, or maybe should I say demonstrated, true justice, but it also, demonstrated this justice in a way that makes the sins of those individuals who were accusers very relevant and very, very clear as well. It's just like Jesus. He seems to always have the right response to everything, not only in his teaching, but in his actions as well. And then there's another important part of chapter 8 where Jesus is explaining and demonstrating his eternality, or his eternal existence. And this is a thing that John typically wants to demonstrate on every turn of the page, that Jesus is not some created being that just pops up, but Jesus is the eternal I am. He is the God of creation. And this divinity thing becomes very, very important to John, because on one hand, he's a human being. On the other hand, he's God, and he's both at the same time, all the time. And so when we read through chapter 8, we see this kind of what we often see, that it's hard, first off, to accept. But then we see the Jewish arguments, and I say this with respect, the way in which Judaism is having a tough time comprehending the fact that Jesus could be God, because their tradition does not allow for it. And really, to be honest with you, as we read through the text, there are a lot of things here that would make such a doctrine or such an idea very, very hard to believe, unless you are seeing the things that Jesus is doing, and unless he can back it up with some irrefutable truth. Okay? And that irrefutable truth is the resurrection itself. Okay? And that's where we're leading. So, a lot of times when we're having these conversations, we would often say, well, why couldn't they believe? Why couldn't they just see the miracles? And why wouldn't they believe that? Well, I get it. I listen, I'm right there with you. If I was there, I'm prone to believe that I would say, gosh, that is him. This is him. This is who we've been waiting for. And there were a number of people who did say that. But I think we have to really consider the reality and the fact that when these individuals are reading Torah, the prophets, and the books of wisdom, it is very easy, should I say, to miss Jesus, because there is no explicit literature that actually explains what it would look like whenever the Messiah arrives. Now, we know things he would do. We know expectations that have obviously been set through the prophets, like the restoration of Zion, the unity of God's people. But when it comes to the Messiah, like who he is, his character, his behavior, his persona, all these different things, there are a few passages like Isaiah 53, right, that talks about what he would look like. But there's no real concrete literature that says this is what he's going to do. This is how. And let me just say this: there's nothing that shows us that he would look like what he looks like here. Now, obviously, the purpose for that is so that when you see it, you would believe it and you would accept it, because you would understand this is God's way of moving in the earth. Now, the way we can solidify and confirm this notion is by what we read just a couple days ago in Matthew chapter 16. Whenever Jesus asked them being the disciples, who do men say that I am? They started calling out all the names. And he says, who do you say that I am? And the response was, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Here's what he said. He said, Peter, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. You see, the thing that has to happen in this process of coming to faith is an experience with Jesus that leads to a revelation about Jesus. And unless your heart is conditioned to receive that, then even though you are very, very well versed in the Torah, you will read it and miss Jesus because you don't see the divine connection and you don't open yourself up to the possibility of divine revelation. And that's what we're seeing happen right here in these Gospels, and particularly in this passage, where yes, they know about Abraham, yes, they know about the promise of the Messiah coming, but they don't know how to open up their hearts, and they're not willing to open up their hearts to receive what God might be doing in their world that may not look like what they're used to seeing. And that is the difference, the openness of one's heart. So I want to just like draw that point out and bear it out because it's very important. I think we would learn a lot from their mistake, right? To have this open mindset about what God could possibly do, and maybe it will help us see Jesus more clearly. But what did you see in today's reading? Leave it in the comment box below. Let us know your thoughts, and I believe it'll be a great blessing to us. Until next time, thank you for watching. Take care. God bless, and remember, live by the word.